Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, we are continuing with this series on the Makharijul Huruf, or the articulation points of the Arabic letters. We have covered almost more than half the letters of the Arabic language, and inshallah in the next couple of sessions we will be completing this series. As you must have realized by now, it is very important for you to practice reciting these letters the way we have explained in the videos. First try on your own and then with the teacher in the live sessions so that your mistakes, if any, may be corrected. In today's session, we will look at the tip of the tongue, which is one of the most important articulation points since it is the region from where the maximum letters of the Arabic language are emitted. We will also study the recitation of some of the letters which emanate from this articulation point. We will first do a quick revision of the tongue letters that we have covered in the previous two sessions. We will then try to understand why the tip of the tongue is so important in articulation and which are the 11 letters that specifically use the tip of the tongue as their makhraj. But the letters that we are going to study in detail today are the letters Noon, Ra, Ta, Daal and Ta. It is from this Makhraj chart for the letters of the tongue that we will understand why the tip of the tongue is such an important articulation point. You can see that only two letters Qaf and Kaf emanate from the deepest part of the tongue, while three letters emanate from the middle, the Jim, the Sheen and the non-mad Ya. Also, only two letters, the Dad and the Lam, emanate from the edges of the tongue, while there are 11 letters emitting from the tip of the tongue. This is the most compared to any other part of the mouth or the throat. Now, even within the tip of the tongue, there are 5 different makhraj points. The letters Noon and Ra have their own unique makhraj or articulation point, while the letters Ta, Dal and Ta, they share a single articulation point. In the same way, the letters Sad, Za and Sin share a single articulation point, and so do the letters Dha, Dhal and Tha. We will study in detail how each of these letters are recited differently, even though some of them share the same articulation point, and also look at how different they are from their characteristics or sifat point of view. Let's start with understanding the letter Noon in more detail. The makhraj of Noon has two components. The primary makhraj is when the tip of the tongue touches that which is opposite to it from the gums of the top two incisors. This point is just under the makhraj of Lam. This is one half of the makhraj called the Lisani component or the tongue component. There is also a component due to the nasalization of the letter which emanates from the khayshum or the nasal passage. This is the other half of the makhraj and it is termed as ghunnah. It is the sound of the ghunnah or the nasalization that actually continues to run slightly for this letter. When you recite it with a sukoon, an, in, un, notice how the nasalization continues to run slightly. The easiest way to understand the relevance of the khayshum or this nasal passage in reciting the ghunnah of the noon is that if you try to recite the noon while blocking the nasal passage, the sound of noon will not come out as expected. Try it yourself. Block your nose with your hand and then try to recite the noon. Ad, id, ud. So you see how important it is for both the Lisani component and the Khayshumi component to coexist for the correct recitation of the letter Noon. So both these components must exist whenever we recite a mutaharrik Noon. Look at these examples. Namariqu, Aynun, Aynin. In all these examples, the letter Noon was recited from both of its makhraj components. However, in case of a sakin Noon, it is possible for the Lisani component to be dropped while just retaining the ghunnah. So in this example, Yanhaakum, both the components of the Noon's makhraj are retained. Whereas in this example, Man Yasha'u, you will notice how the lisani component was dropped, whereas only the ghunnah was retained. Inshallah, in the future sessions, we will study detailed rules based on which we will understand on what basis one or even both components of the noon's makhraj may be dropped. The forms of the letter noon are mostly easy to identify from the mushaf, with the exception of few cryptic forms as in here and here. The most important thing to note, however, is the tanween. We will study later, inshallah, the details regarding different forms of tanween itself. But for now, note that the tanween is nothing but a sakin noon. Look at some of the examples here, how they all end with the sakin noon in the form of tanween. خاشعة أجرا خلق عظيم متين مكذوم. Now another important aspect of the noon sakin or the tanween is that there are certain rules based on which it can be completely dropped or it can completely change to a meme. Look at these examples. لَإِلَّمْ فَأَنْبَتْنَا. Also, the lisani component of noon can be merged to another letter's makhraj, while its nasalization can be retained or extended. For example, in kana. The rules related to each of the above behaviors will be covered in much detail once we move to the study of the qawaid or the incidental characteristics of letters. For now, try to apply the below characteristics whenever you practice reciting the noon. An, in, un. Notice how the breath is imprisoned and there is a slight running of the nasalization ghunnah sound. Note that the lisani component of noon is always light or in tarqiq. For example, na, ni, nu. Whereas the ghunnah can be heavy or light based on rules which we will study later. So the ghunnah is light in tanzilun, whereas it is heavy in the word yanzuru. Let's now have a close look at the letter Ra and try to understand how to recite this unique letter. Now from the makhraj point of view, the letter Ra is not very far from the letter Noon. So the front tip of the tongue strikes the gum line of the top two incisors opposite to the tip, quite close to the makhraj of Noon. But there is one unique aspect which gives Ra its various characteristics. At the point of articulation, where the tip of the tongue strikes the gum line of the top incisors, this point of articulation does not get blocked completely. But there is a small opening that remains in the middle, as can be clearly seen from this diagram. And now from this open space, a portion of the sound runs slightly, giving this letter many of its characteristics, such as bainiyah and inhiraf, which we will study in much detail later, inshallah. It is important to note that this passing of the sound from the small gap causes the tongue to vibrate slightly, but you should not do it excessively. So it should be like ar, ir, ur. The letter Ra is again one of those letters which can occur in tafkhim or tarqiq based on incidental conditions or rules, which again we will be studying later, inshallah. Let's look at some examples. Ar-Rahmanu, Hardin, Rabbika, Yasturuna, Qadirina. Since Ra is a non-connecting letter, it will never connect to any letter that comes after it. The forms of Ra, as can be seen from these examples, are very clear and very easy to identify. Dear brothers and sisters, the mistakes that we generally make in reciting the Ra are due to the different ways in which we may be accustomed to recite the letter R in the English language. So those from the West who are accustomed with the rolling of the R would say it something like Ra, or causing the tongue to touch the palate farther back and being kind of suspended instead of the front part touching the gum line. So we don't say Ar-Rahman, where the tip is actually kind of rolling back towards the back part of the palate. No, instead the tip should touch the gum line of the front incisors. Al-Rahman. Also, many of us sometimes recite it with excessive vibration, which gives the impression of multiple ra's, something like ar. Now this happens when the makhraj point is getting locked completely, which causes the tongue to flap and vibrate vigorously, giving the sound of multiple ra's. The correct manner is for the tongue to strike the gums of the upper incisors, but a small opening remaining, and this causes the sound to continue or to run slightly, as can be seen from this diagram here. This gap, which results in three attributes of the letter ra: inhiraf, bayniyah and tikrar. We will study them in more detail inshallah later. So we don't say ar-Rahman, giving multiple ra's. So recite it with ease, letting the sound flow smoothly within the gap. Ar-Rahman. Also note that the letter ra can be in tafkhim or in tarqiq based on rules which we will be studying later inshallah. For now, try to get the makhraj right and practice on your own and try to reproduce it in the live class. Ra, ri, ru, ar, ir, ur. The next three letters that we are going to study today are quite straightforward. The letters ta, dal and ta. The articulation point of these three letters is the same, the tip of the tongue touching the roots or the gums of the top two incisors. Even though the three letters share the same articulation point, they differ in their characteristics. So you see how these two have jahr, shiddah and qalqalah, whereas the letter ta, even though it has shiddah, it is a letter of hams and does not have qalqalah. Also the letter ta is heavy, while these two are always light. Let's see how to recite each of these letters in detail. So as we saw earlier, the sound of ta originates when the front tip of the tongue strikes the roots or gums of the top two incisors. Now at the point of contact, the sound and breath both are imprisoned. However, in its sakin form, this letter is characterized by qalqalah, causing the tongue to separate from the palate immediately after making contact to it, as in al-ta. So if I don't give qalqalah to the sakin ta, the sound will be completely blocked, as in al. So you need to give qalqalah and recite it as al-ta. Look at this example. Al-ta'amahum. Also note that the ta is a heavy letter, so the tongue is made into a concave. And not only that, this concaving causes the sound to be compressed within it and the roof of the mouth. طائفة يطوفون بالقسط. The various forms of ta as a standalone letter or in the beginning of the word, in the middle and in the end can be seen in these examples as listed here. Note that the letter ta is the heaviest letter of the Arabic language, and it is this heaviness that makes it so different from the other letter ta, which shares the same makhraj with it. So whenever you recite the ta, bring to life these characteristics of this unique letter. The qalqalah and the jahr and shiddah being so apparent when it has a sukoon, as in al-ta, it-ta, ut-ta, as well as the tafkhim and itbaq, which make it clearly discernible from the letter ta, as in ta, ti, tu. The letter dal, which shares its makhraj with ta, also shares many characteristics with it. So just like ta, this letter also emanates when the tip is raised to touch the roots or gums of the front two top incisors, and the sound and breath both are imprisoned at the point of contact while separating immediately thereafter due to the qalqalah when the letter has a sukoon. So for example, if I recite it with a sukoon and if I don't give the qalqalah, the sakin dal will sound something like ad, id, ud. So the sound will be completely blocked. So you need to give the qalqalah in order to recite the dal with sukoon correctly. Just like ad, id, ud, fadkhuli, thamuda, ahadun, al-biladi. The letter dal is a non-connecting letter just like the letter ra. The forms of dal as standalone and within a word are easy to identify. They do not appear in cryptic forms, as can be seen from the examples in front of you. Note that Daal is a light letter or letter of tarqiq. So whenever you practice, take care of all these characteristics listed below. The jahr, shiddah and tarqiq, as in da, di, do. So you don't recite it as da, since it gives the impression that it's a heavy letter, which is not the case. Also, the characteristic of qalqalah makes itself apparent only when the dal has a sukoon, as in ad, id, ud. The final letter that we are going to study today is the letter ta. Now, since this letter sounds so similar to the letter ta and also shares the same makhraj as ta, it is very important for us to recite them with all the characteristics so as to make them easily discernible to the listener. So for reciting ta, when the tip of the tongue touches the gums of the two upper incisors, it causes the sound and the breath both to be imprisoned. But the key point of difference is what happens after this. While the ta has a qalqalah which causes the separation between the tongue and the palate, the letter ta has the characteristic of hums, due to which the breath is slightly allowed to pass immediately after articulation, and there is no qalqalah, as in at, it, ut. Another key difference is that the ta, unlike the ta, is always light. So you recite it as a ta and not ta, because otherwise it might sound just like the letter ta. Let's look at the examples. وَالْوَتْرِ تَيَسَّرَ تُقَدِّمُ تِلْكَ. Now the letter ta has additional forms which you can see from this table here. Also, we already saw the cryptic form of ta, in which it can come attached to the letter jim, ha and kha. Besides this form, there are two forms of the standalone ta, as well as the ta that comes at the end of the word. Look at these examples here and here. This form of ta is also called as ta ut-ta'neeth, or the ta of femininity. Inshallah, we will see in the rules of waqf or stopping how this form of ta changes to ha, as in az-zakah, al-mutma'innah. So practice the letter ta, always bearing in mind to differentiate between the similar sounding letter ta. This will happen automatically when you recite keeping these characteristics in mind, inshallah. The jahr, the hums and the tarqiq. Ta, ti, tu, at, it, ut. For further study, I request you to visit these links that you see on the screen right now and listen to the way the Shaykh articulates those letters. In the next session, we will conclude with the letters of the tongue by understanding how to recite the remaining 6 letters that emanate from it. This is your brother Shadab signing off until we meet again. Subhanallahi wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.